Welcome, everyone. My name is Brian Elaine, and I produce the Writing for Your Life conferences. Thank you for joining us at this very first Writing for Your Life online writers conference. Our hashtag is #Writing for Your Life if you would like to use it on social media. This session this evening features Lil Copan, Senior Acquisitions Editor for General Trade Books at Eerdmans Publishing. Lil previously worked in acquisitions for several religious houses, including Abingdon Press, Ave Maria Press, and Paraclete Press, among others. Among her areas of expertise are trade line development, project management, author and platform cultivation, substantive editing, and cross-platform content development. Lil has worked with an impressive array of best-selling authors include Madeline L'Engle, Scott McKnight, Debbie Blue, Amy Freicholm, Thomas Lynch, and Lauren Winter. Also, Lil will be a featured speaker at the Frederick Buechner Writers Workshop at Fuller Seminary in September 2017. Thank you, Lil, for joining us today.
Oh, it's great to be here. Thanks so much. So the title of the webinar is What Publishers Are Looking For. There's an alternate title. It's sort of literary speed dating, finding an author and publisher match. I've been thinking a lot about how that sort of sense of fit is often well researched, but it often is quick. You know, there's a sense of recognition. You probably see that recognition when you go to a bookstore and you're like, that's a book that's for me. And you have that real sense of fit. So what I'd like to do is I'm going to just click on a little bit of the PowerPoint. I'm going to shift back and forth. So if I disappear, you should see something else on the screen. So I just want to run through a few of the things we'll cover. I want to sort of introduce what we're talking about, begin to think about what it means to have a writer who find a publisher fit. And then I'll encourage you, as you're thinking about ideas that you already have, and maybe you already have a proposal, to really narrow down your list and how to do that. And then we'll research the narrowed publisher list. I'll talk you through some of those directions and ideas, and then we can put it all together. Your skill set, publisher interest, closing in on the target, and finding that match and sending in your proposal. And then we can talk a little bit about revising your proposals. And then I think there'll be a little time at the end for Q&A. So I really welcome questions that you feel target the things that you're interested in looking at publishers. So a little bit about me. Brian had introduced some of the work that I do. So one of the things I'd love for you to do is, when I'm talking about a publisher-author fit, is really think about what you know about a publisher. So I'm going to run through some of the publishing houses I've worked with. And as I'm describing them, you'll either say, there's a sense of fit there, like that sounds like a fit for me. That's a direction I write in. I write in this field. I have that kind of approach or voice. So you can keep that in mind, and there may be no sense of fit, and that's actually, it may sound not great, but it is very great because you know what kind of writer you are and you know what kind of publisher you're looking for. I first worked with Herald Shaw Publishers. They were purchased by Waterbrook now. There was a literary series there. It was writers such as Madeline L'Engle, Lucy Shaw, Paula D'Arcy, really focused on faith and literary craft, ecumenically minded, and a real engagement with Christian sensibility in the sort of wider umbrella. I worked with Paraclete Press, ecumenical focus, but the focus there was on 3 streams of Christian tradition: Catholic, Protestant, Orthodox traditions, and spirituality in those traditions. With Abingdon Press, it was a press that was informed by Methodist tradition, but it was ecumenically focused so that it would retain the sensibility of a Methodist tradition while exploring different Christian traditions that sort of fed that vein. So I would say one of the things they had a focus on was social justice, always sort of faith in action. Ave Maria Press, Catholic, interested in meeting a Catholic readership, but also a general market readership. And now in my work with Eerdmans, there's sort of a return to the roots of my original work, which was really literary, thoughtful, crafted work for the general trade market with a religious sensibility. So they're the kinds of books that you would find in a Barnes & Noble in the religion, spirituality, Christianity section. You know, there's a real, if you are familiar with Eerdmans, there's a real sort of gravitas to the publishing house, real thoughtfulness, committed to writing, to craft, and to an aesthetic, and also to big ideas. So that's where I am working now. Some of the authors in the trade line I work with, you'll be familiar with C.S. Lewis, Joan Chittister, Eugene Peterson, Brennan Manning, James K.A. Smith, Philip Yancey. So it's a line that has a lot of interest in sort of classic, long-lasting, evergreen material. So I gave you all of that. It's a kind of a mouthful. As you were listening, I hope that you maybe discerned already, you know, sense of fit, not sense of fit. That's really interesting. That's not so interesting. And as you are thinking in terms of publishing author fit, it's really important to pay attention to what a publisher, their sense of mission, what they're looking for, what they're doing. So in my work with authors, sometimes I'm pitching an idea to an author, sometimes authors are pitching ideas or sending manuscript submissions to me, and it's there can be some really valuable back and forth in terms of developing ideas. The reason fit is really important is that if author research hasn't been done, it really sort of not harms, but it takes time away from you as an author finding a valuable fit, and from publishers having that sense of fit as well. So I'm going to just run through some numbers here. Sorry to do math if you're a word nerd, which I am. So these are numbers that I needed help with. So, all right. Eerdmans gets 1,300 proposals a year. These are approximate numbers. Only 40% are even considered viable for review. That is, they have some sense of match in terms of what we might publish, a theme, approach, a type of author in those 40%. The first things that are declined without review are those that are not in genres we publish. So fiction, poetry, fantasy, romance. I mean, the things that a thoughtful person would say, Eerdmans does not publish that. I probably should not go out to Eerdmans for that. The next set that is declined, I'm putting this in sort of negative terms, but I hope that you will see it in positive terms, which is that when you look at how the numbers work, you would be thoughtful in terms of that match. The next set of declines are that they're not in a correct category that's clearly a fit for us. There might be some sense of fit, but an idea isn't just quite right. So of those numbers, only 10% are taken into an acquisitions review board. And of those 10%, which are reviewed by a board, only 1% is accepted for publication.
So Lil, let me ask you a couple of questions just to make sure that I'm clear myself on this. So
Sure.
the 1,300 proposals is across all of Eerdmans or just your portion?
No, it's across all of Eerdmans.
Then at the end of the day, 1% of that 1,300 become a book. Is that basically what the bottom line of it is?
Yes, that's what it is. But what I'll say is those are books that come in that are not that are considered unsolicited manuscripts. So that is what comes in to the publishing house that doesn't have either a personal connection to an editor or hasn't been requested. So the ones that are requested, the ones that we reach out to, those have a much higher percentage rate because hopefully the editor sees a sense of fit with an author, and then they would work on a proposal together. So those numbers, I think I would say from that 1% to 10% it depends on the publishing house. Smaller publishing houses may have higher percentage rates of that sense of fit. So what I'd like to do is talk with you a little more about what needs to come together for not only that 1% fit, but really even getting past the general submissions, through publisher website. One thing that I think Eerdmans is unique in is that every proposal is reviewed and considered. I mean, it may be that it's not a fit and then that's sort of immediately taken off the table, but That is not true of every publisher. So sometimes manuscript submission services are really valuable because they get you to publishers and editors or agents that you might not sort of be able to connect with. One of the things that as you're starting to think about fit is you obviously want to be very sort of targeted with what you are presenting to a publishing house. So it may be counterintuitive, but as you're looking at a publisher match, you want to have a good sense of what you yourself are. So you want to look at what you yourself, where your gifts are. So you want to understand your writing sensibility. Are you a literary writer? Are you more popular? Are you an academic writer? Are you, where your writing craft skill attention is? Look at your bookshelf. I mean, I think that's often a really great indicator of where your sensibilities are, what you're thinking about, what you're reading, and where you're responding in your writing. As you do that, you also may see that there are certain publishers that are returned to your bookshelves, or that you go to the library and you're like, that is a publisher I return to often. They have a certain sensibility. They have a certain category they're interested in. They have a sense of mission that you share. And those are all great things to start paying attention to as you are writing and working and developing a proposal. So one of the things, in some ways, I have an assumption if you are coming to this webinar that you at least have some kind of book idea in mind. You have a big idea, you have something that you are interested in sharing, and now you're thinking of where would this go? You may have already a draft of a book proposal, or you've started some writing. It's not necessary, but those are things that you may already have in place. So I maybe when it comes to the questions, if I haven't gauged that right, please feel free to ask questions that are really targeted to what you specifically are doing. One of the things in looking for a publisher is I would also make the assumption that you may not have a literary agent yet, because often a literary agent becomes the liaison between your writing and a publishing house, and they hopefully have a good sense of determining that fit. So as you are sort of returning to your writing sensibilities, one of the things you just want to ask yourself are, what are your ideas? Are they in, what arena are they in? Are they in social justice? Are you interested in thought pieces? Are you interested in politics? Are you interested in reconciliation? If you're interested in politics, I hope you're interested in reconciliation. Is there a certain faith tradition that you are thinking about writing toward? Is there a certain audience you're thinking about writing toward? Understand what your genre is. How would you classify it? How would you articulate it? How would you begin to articulate the idea that you're forming? Maybe you are writing about an ancient spiritual practice. You will want to start sort of understanding where that fits, what kind of spirituality writing, or what kind of practical theology or faith practice writing. Who are the other writers who are writing in that arena? Also, pay attention to your social media. Where are you drawn? Are you drawn to Twitter? Are you drawn to Facebook? Are you drawn to Medium? Where are you interested in blogs? And find where your sort of network and circle is. Are you drawn to a certain kind of writer? Who is that writer? Who publishes that writer? I mean, I think it's an extraordinary, if you like detective work, or research, I think it's really fun to start, really narrowing into the niches that you work with and understand, where you sort of fit in a certain kind of circle. What are your hangout places online? What are they reading? Who are the publishers that represent them? Or maybe you're interested in writing for magazines. What are the online magazines that are representing some of those directions? Maybe you read Sojourners, maybe you read Cocoon, maybe you read Utne Reader, maybe you read The Christian Century. And then as you find you're looking at magazines or blogs, you'll also see that there are book reviews in most of these places, and you can start paying attention to what publishers are published there. And how that's starting to fit together for you. If you're a Goodreads if you're on Goodreads, I'll apologize that I'm horrible with Goodreads, but I know that there are a lot of writers who very quickly and sort of find their networks on Goodreads. These are the books they read. These are the books they recommend. So you may want to start paying attention to where not only people are gathering, but what they're reading, what the publishers are. If you are doing all of those, so let's say that you took all of those things, you started doing your research, you looked at your shelves, your social media, you're talking to your friends, and you see that they're reading certain writers, and they're represented by these magazines or these different publishing houses. You will want to maybe start thinking, there are these publishers, there are these imprints, and narrow down. I'd recommend, just for sanity's sake, thinking, I come across these 15 frequently, or I'm familiar with them, or they're a good sense of fit. You could build up a list of maybe 15 publishers and imprints that you think are sort of in your network, that have some of the interests or voices. Maybe you're a writer that is interested in this kind of voiciness. I mean, I think of a writer like Lauren Winner as somebody who has a really distinct writing voice. Maybe she is represented by certain publishers, and you think there are more there. Where is that sense of fit? So once you are looking in that direction, you want to start researching the publisher. One thing I'll say is, if you don't have an agent, a lot of people in publishing refer to like the big five as the larger publishing houses, and most of them accept only submissions that come through an agent. So you'll just want to be aware, maybe your book is, you think, I'm a really good fit with a smaller house. I like that kind of sensibility. I'm going to look for a place that accepts submissions directly, that I don't have to go with an agent. Others may find an agent is a good fit. And I'll introduce a few of those things. So you have this, say, 15. Is that starting to feel like a fit? Do they have different lines? Some publishers have a trade line, some have an academic line, some have line that has a different focus and imprint. So you might want to pay attention to just noodling around on a publisher's website and seeing sort of if you gravitate to a certain imprint or publisher. I'm sorry about these earbuds, they keep popping out. Most publishers will now, you can either request a catalog, or you can or they're listed online, and it's worth looking at what they're publishing, what's coming out that's new, and just see if there's a sense of fit, or if there's an interest, or I have an idea like that, or, oh wow, I did have an idea like that, and they have the book. So maybe I need to tweak my idea and think differently about my idea, but that might be a publisher to keep in mind. You go to their website. A lot of publishers are pretty active in social media, and they often choose one or two arenas in social media that they're very facile in. So pay attention to the writers they're talking about, the interviews that they're conducting, and maybe listen to how some of the writers that they represent are talking about their work, their writing, and also the publisher. You might want to pay attention to, as you think of publishers, they'll have a mission statement. Most places do. Actually, Eerdmans doesn't. And Eerdmans considers actually their catalog, our brand, our mission, our statement. It's very diverse. It's part of the reason some people like sort of drilling down to a mission statement so that it's very clear, it's concise, and others like the catalog to represent all that they are hoping to do. So if you are interested in that kind of research work, it's worth doing, finding the core of what a publishing house is thinking about themselves and what they're looking for. An acquisitions editor who's an executive editor at Riverhead, which I found really interesting. I want you to read just a little bit of something that he's talked about in his own acquisitions. He came to Riverhead. If you know, like Riverhead, some of the writers represented. Kathleen Norris is one that sort of comes to the top of my head, and I think she was acquired during the time that he was, and he's still at Riverhead. But so this is Jake Morrissey. So he was asked to describe his mission in terms of a publisher and what kinds of books that he was looking for Riverhead. So if you're interested in Riverhead, here's maybe starting point. I'm here to build Riverhead's success and sensitivity to intelligent books, books that are idea-driven and have distinctive voice. I believe that important ideas can be found in overlapping categories: history and architecture, politics and humor, science and memoir, self-help and historical science. What interests me is a book that does not fit easily into a typical sales and marketing category. I hope you're sort of thinking, where does it fit? How do, there's a real range, but there's also a real sense of something specific at the same time, even with that diversity. I like books that bring about a personal transformation, more information. For example, a book about how the scientific study of brain chemistry is impacting our views of faith. When he was asked, would one have to be a physician or researcher to write such a book for Riverhead, or might the writer be a journalist? Jake Morrissey said this: that depends on the approach, the depth of knowledge and reliability that a writer brings to the subject. And when asked, what is more important to you, voice or story, he said this: the quality of a book is all in the writing. Good art cannot save a bad story. Storytelling, even in nonfiction, is paramount. So I really, love that you can start gathering information about a house's sensibility in acquiring editor's sensibility from interviews, from what you read, from what you see online. And then you start seeing what publishers expect from authors. Now you're hopefully starting to bring the pieces together. So you have the publisher website. We talked a little bit about that. You're starting to see their mission. They're sort of clarifying. You'll see that some writers are very focused on, some publishers are really focused on writers who have a large platform. That is something that varies from publisher to publisher, but often publishers have an expectation of authors that are engaging either on social media, on a blog, or are speakers or lead retreats, or have some way to develop a wider audience and readership, and that is a group that publishers see as evident either online or through seeing speaking engagement. So that's something really to pay attention to, as well as which publishing houses where that is really important, and other houses where the writing or there's a mix of that kind of social media engagement. And I'll say for some of the writers who are like, I'm a writer, I'm just a writer's writer. There are publishers that really work well with that kind of writer's writer, and other publishers that really care about this mixture of the writer and the marketing, the platform person, and needing to come together. So that's also, when you're putting the pieces together, something to pay attention to. So I think once you get to that place, say you started with 15, now you're down to 5, your idea, what you're writing about, you start knowing the publisher interest, you've narrowed that down, and you are starting to think about the unique approach that you bring. When I referred earlier to, you're going through maybe a catalog at a publisher at their website, and then all of a sudden you see an idea that was your idea, or they cover something that's very similar to what you're covering. You want to start thinking about what sets what you're doing apart. What makes somebody say, I'm very interested in that idea, I'm less interested in that. And a lot of it is its presentation. It's a sense that it brings a new reading on something. Something is unique. It has a sense of interplay. So those are things to, really pay attention to in your own writing. What is your special skill set, and how can you bring that into your engagement with a publisher? And that is sort of closing in, on the target. And it may be that I sometimes find it helpful to, just build a map. What is your writing sensibility? Eerdmans has a real care for craft. It has a real care for responsible writing about ideas in really responsible ways, so that the research or the thoughtful approach behind something is there. It's not just like ideas flung out without really backing them up. And every publisher is different. Pay attention to those sorts of things. Are you a really voicey writer? Are you plain and clear? Can you take big ideas and sort of boil them down to really take that complexity, keep that sense of complexity and nuance, but really summarize something that's, some publishers are really sort of looking for that kind of. One thing I think is interesting about publishing is often when you come to an editor, a publisher, somebody who's acquiring manuscripts, you say, what are you looking for? And they'll say, I'll know it when I know it when I see it. Which is, I'm sure, like so frustrating, but it also means that, there's no promise of sort of like, this is a big idea, I'm going to write for that big idea and hope this publisher publishes it. I think there's something that publishers are looking for that is that kind of passion for what, your skill set is, what you're doing, how to engage that big idea that you have with an audience that you already have or a potential audience. And how you can articulate that to that audience. When publishers are seeing that, that I think is a real spark for publishers. So and I'll return to that idea of when you're like when you go to a bookstore, there are certain things that you respond to very naturally. And you'll say, that's a book for me, that is not a book for me. It seems very clear when you think in that direction, that if you start thinking in terms of publishing and publishing houses and writer-publisher fit, I think that'll make it really sort of easier for you to sort of start making that match. I just wanted to put this in because I love this image, like totally. It's Holly Mead's Holy Trinity. So there are three things I want you to think about. Which is why I brought in the Trinity. So there are three essentials, I think, is the author concept. When we are, I think when any publisher is really looking for what makes not only a manuscript unique, but a proposal, the full proposal, super. So if you take these sort of larger concepts and then start boiling them down and what exactly a proposal looks like, I hope you have that sense of real fit and dynamic. And what publishers and editors are looking for is often a concept. It's an idea. It's something that strikes you. Like sometimes you could see it even in a title and you think that's, I don't know what that book is even about, but it's such an intriguing title. I want to spend some time with it. And that's often how publishers, if they feel like it's in their wheelhouse, they will say, that's a great concept. Is the writing quality there? They'll just move to, are these three things together? Is there the concept? Is there the writing craft that really is carefully and well wrought, that it works as a book and works as a book project and it's well conceived? And those are some of the things you'll talk about or you'll hear more about on developing the proposal. And then author platform. It's very interesting to me that like you could look at those three things and say, I am two of those three things. I am a writer par excellence. I really know how to communicate. I communicate well. People are intrigued by what they read. They respond when I blog. They'll share it. And that you have that kind of engagement with a readership. Some people they don't necessarily have that kind of platform, but they may have a different way that they engage. Maybe they lead retreats, maybe they do something else. And so you won't always find these three together, but you will usually find, if one is weak, the other two are super strong. So I'll just take an example that is not current, but I'm sorry, but I'm just thinking about, Annie Dillard's, some of her early work, Pilgrim at Tinker Creek, and that it had so much craft and beauty that I don't think many people really. It became a word of mouth book. Obviously, it was award winning, but sometimes one of those, if it's stellar, can sort of overcome the others in a really positive way. So just know where your strengths are and work with what you have. There are ways that you can build that in talking about the proposal. I'm sure Chris Farabee will also be talking about what it looks like to build your platform. So those are some of the things I wanted to mention. I'll skip over this, except, excuse me, I put this in because I'm obviously interested in the arts, but I think it's important to do important work in the world, to be passionate about the work you do. I think that really carries a lot. I think publishers see when something is really, there's a difference between what you write from your brain and what you write from that white hot center, and paying attention to where, where your sense of purpose and mission is in your writing, and how to really, bring that through to your writing is really important. I think publishers see that, and you probably as a reader really respond to work that like that's really engaged work. Something there is meaningful. It's real. They're writing the authentic life. They're living the authentic life, and it's intriguing. I mean, it's really compelling. We don't have a lot of time, so I'm going to skip working on your proposal, especially because Chris Farabee will, but be inspired by writers like Flannery O'Connor. Before, I'm going to just switch back, and then we can get to a Q&A. When I'm talking about that sort of passion and trying to find its channel, I wanted to read something else, and this is Ann Patchett. If you're an Ann Patchett fan, as I am, hopefully you'll appreciate this. So Ann Patchett sold her first story to Paris Review, and I would say a lot of writers have their early sort of publishing life in magazines before they move to books. So Patchett sold her first story to the Paris Review when she was 19. She says, "If I weren't a novelist, the thing I would most like to do is build dioramas. I was one of those kids who built little worlds in shoeboxes. That's basically what novel writing is. You get to build every tree, every person, put them all in place, and decide when the sun comes up and goes down. That I can make a living at this is astonishing." This was from a Boston Globe article, but I'm really interested in that. So there's something, it's about how Ann Patchett sees her skill set. I mean, it's in building dioramas, it's in building little worlds. And then when it translates to her writing, you see she does exactly that. And I think paying attention to how you write and how you convey something that comes from that place maybe it's dioramas, or maybe it's bird watching, or maybe it's something else, and it really can find its expression in writing, in publishing. It's really worth paying attention to. I'm not sure I'm articulating as well as I'd like that connection, but hopefully you heard it. There are a lot of things that when publishers are looking at proposals coming in that they're keeping in mind. And I'm just going to run through a few of these things, and it's not to overwhelm you, but to actually say that, we've boiled it down to a few, that trinity, those three things, and those are worth sort of sticking to. But just so you know what's sort of in the background for publishers, they're obviously looking at message, they're looking at content, they're looking at brand, author brand, their own brand, and that sense of match. Some publishers are very focused on the sort of takeaway. What will the reader leave this book with? Is it an inspiration? Are you compelling? Are you compelling change? Are you, what is the message, and what does the reader leave with? Who are the book's advocates? Who are the circle of people who support the book? Are they influencers? Are they people who will, give you shout outs when the book comes around? Are they your supportive circle for your writing? Obviously, author platform, we talked a little bit about that, the quality of the writing, the craft, even project timing. There's a difference in a book that is, will be ready in 6 months, that it's in process, a book that will come out, the manuscript will be ready in 12 months. Those are just things to sort of pay attention to. If it's a really sort of, and that's usually a standard 6 to 12 months, just so you are sort of thinking about when, how publishers are thinking in that direction. Who is the target audience? Again, some of these things will be in the proposals segment, but you know, the genre, how does the author communicate? Often publishers are looking online to see video clips and see videos. Do they present well? Do they articulate ideas well? Would they work well in a radio interview? I mean, those are questions. And also, I mean, obviously, and a publisher is looking for keeping what is their mission and finding those who in some way voice that mission, and are good voices that they feel will represent these ideas really well and compellingly. But again, so you're down to those three things: good content, a good idea, strong writing, strong craft, a strong platform, those three things. So just a little summary. I know we'll get to Q&A. Publishers, so they're looking for a match to their publishing house, their approach, their vision. And when you do due diligence, it really pays off. I have had writers send materials to me, and I've known that they've done the research, that there's a sense of fit. It may not be the project fit. Sometimes I've gone back to writers and said, you know what, this is not it, but I love this thing on page 5. That's an incredible paragraph, and it points to something that I think you're doing really well. You know, would you be interested in reshaping it? If it isn't a fit, often when there's a sense of fit for somebody who's a writer and a publishing house, often you'll sort of stay on the landscape of that publisher. You know, we're always sort of keeping feelers out for potential writers. You know, if they're a fit, if this is the time, what are their ideas coming through? Another thing I would say, and I love this opportunity, Brian, thank you for creating these webinars. But I think webinars, writers' conferences are really a wonderful way to start learning about where your writing, meets the publishing world, and often getting sort of face-to-face with editors, with publishers, seeing what books they're bringing to a conference or what they're talking about really helps, hopefully helps you shape the work that you're doing in a way that brings sort of dynamic engagement with you and a publisher. So I hope that was a good starting point for thinking about Match and thinking about what publishers are looking for and how to bring your vision to their vision. And I'd love to take any questions or
Yes, so thank you so much, Lil. That was really great information. So for all of the attendees, you can feel free to ask questions through the chat box, and I'll relay those to Lil. Maybe just to get started, I'll throw one at you.
Sure.
Maybe you can talk a little bit about what have been the most frequent ways in which you have found new authors, you personally, in your experience.
So I would... I'll try to sort of run through a list of some of the books that have come through. One was that sort of that kind of cold call manuscript submission. Somebody really thought that we were a fit. They sent a proposal, and it just was both sort of dynamic and charming, and that will be coming out next year. So that's one of the 1%. Others are, blogs that I've read. I'm really intrigued by an idea. I see that other people are intrigued by that idea. There are a lot of likes, or there's a lot of conversation around it. And I will get in touch with the writer and say, is that something you're interested in developing a little more? sometimes I'll hear an interview, or I'll know that somebody's speaking on a certain topic, or that they're in a field that I think there's parallel with a publishing house. So some of it's, online, some of it's in person at conferences, and there's a great sort of felicity of in acquisitions. Sometimes you think, this is an idea that we've been thinking about, or looking for a writer in this topic. And that's not always the case, that you're looking very specifically topically. It is that, I'll know it when I see it. So, but sometimes you just, a conversation begins, and it's in a very unlikely place, and that it leads to an idea, and you think, are you the person to bring that idea through? And or sometimes you'll see an article, and you'll sort of follow up with the author. Sometimes it's an author that I've followed for years, or people have followed for years at our publishing house, and you think, actually there's something that you haven't covered yet, and I think it would be really interesting for your readership, and also for you. I think you'd take great joy in exploring that idea.
Okay.
So those.
While we get on to some of the other questions, Lo, we've got quite a few coming in, so let
super.
me ask you a couple of those. So
Okay.
there's a couple related to having an agent.
Okay.
I think there's a lot of folks that are disheartened with the idea of a 1% success rate with an unsolicited manuscript. So,
Yep.
One question is, would you recommend that a writer with a completed project spend their energy on finding an agent, as opposed to zeroing in on a potential publisher?
I would almost do both. I mean, often you'll go to an agent, you'll say, I think these publishers would be a good fit for this project. Often agents really, it's a good dynamic to sort of work together with an agent. I would say if you are interested in one of the larger publishing houses, you absolutely would want to work with an agent. If you have a good idea, if you have, a strong platform, if you feel like two of those three things are just super strong, and if you have three of those things that are strong, run to an agent. Or if you really feel like there is a house that's a fit, you may want to just go directly to that house. But often an agent helps you, find that target. And that 1% is not meant to be discouraging. It's meant to actually offer that sense of, you saw that sort of like how many people are submitting things to publishing houses they've done no research on, and 40% are immediately tossed away. I mean, the percentage would be higher if the research were done. So I think that's what I also would like to say is those who put the work in on that side will, usually you'll reap the benefits. I don't promise publishing, but I do, but there is this sense of attention to those where there is a sense of fit. But if you feel like you have those things together, you have a strong proposal, absolutely find. And then you need to do your research, a similar kind of research on an agent. What books are they representing, what authors? And then, almost that same list of, what's on your bookshelf. Look at the acknowledgments pages of your of a book that you really love, or you feel like this is a writer who's doing something similar to me. If they may acknowledge an agent, or pay attention to who they're acknowledging, and if maybe you're 1 degree removed. But that's or you could use that as a stepping stone and saying, these are 3 authors that you represent, and my work is really very, not too similar, but sort of uniquely in that kind of realm. Would you, give it a go, look through it. So when you do your research, either for a publisher or for an agent, it really does, it makes good sense.
So the next question is, Do you think it's possible to write a spiritual memoir that is published by a secular publishing house, or even if it's published by a more Christian publishing house, to reach beyond just the Christian market?
Well, yes.
I mean, of course it's possible, but is that very likely?
Well, I mean, tell me.
Let's just start with the part of it. A spiritual memoir. If someone's writing a spiritual, should they have any expectation of having that adopted, any reasonable expectation of having that adopted by something other than a Christian publishing house?
Well, I mean, it depends who you're calling a Christian publishing house. I mean, you have, like, I just read about Riverhead and Jake Morrissey, and he's somebody who's looking at spirituality and religion and where it sort of crosses other, arenas. And I would say Kathleen Norris, Anne Lamott. I mean, there are many people who are publishing on religion, on spirituality.
But as someone who's just starting off?
Well, I think that has to do more with the author platform. I don't think that a publisher, I like to think that publishers can work magic, but I think that often what a publisher does is they complement the work that an author is doing. So if an author has, say, the spiritual but not religious readership in their blog, and they find a good fit with a publisher, often the publisher could bring their readership together with the author readership that's already there and sort of like double and triple and, exponentially. But I'm not sure I would expect a readership that isn't already there for that book. Like, if say you're writing do some sort of test runs in different magazines. I mean, Atlantic does stuff in religion. I mean, it's a great time for writing from a faith base, because almost every publisher, Spiegel and Grau, has some work in religion, in faith-based work, in memoir, in different arenas. Jonathan Sachs. I mean, it's just, it is an incredible time for that sort of writing about faith in a market. But I think the writing really needs to have that sense of reach, and you probably know the writers that you feel are writing really generatively about faith and have that readership. Look at who's publishing them. Look at how they're building their readership. Are they blogging? Can you guest blog with them? Is there a way to bring your readership to somebody else's readership in a way that you're offering them something and they're offering you something back? So I think I think it really does have to do with the voice, the approach, and the readership that an author already may have and can bring. And if you're just starting, often online is just like this great equalizer. You have opportunity to find readerships and develop your voice and find who's reading. And if you want readers in that arena, then start looking at the blogs that have that. Like if you're a reader of The Sun, then the magazine The Sun, you'll know that a lot of people write about religion and spirituality, but it's for a wider readership. I mean, that might be a way to begin.
Okay, so why don't we get on to the next question?
Okay.
If you were to publish your dream project, what would it be?
Oh man, that's like, I'll know it when I see it. And I have to, I'm so disappointed in myself to say that, but I think it would be more that compelling mix of voice, of content, of idea, and of somebody who has a platform that that a publishing house can work with, that we could work with. That just gets me excited. I would say, as an editor, I get really on that sort of Jake Morrissey, Riverhead. I get excited about ideas. If it's a big idea, if it turns around the way that you think about something that you've always thought about in one way, and then all of a sudden it's flipped upside down, but it's really exciting. It's really generative, and it will really sort of change somebody, and change the way they think, change the way they change something about their faith. Those are books I get really excited about.
So this question is from Randy. Are there writing conferences that you would recommend for making the kinds of connections that you've talked about?
Well,
I think we can have some good recommendations on that, wouldn't we?
Sure. Writing for Your Life, I think is great. I think they're a good size for meeting people, for really making connections. I would say if it depends really what genre you're writing in, but the Festival of Faith and Writing is really one of the sort of largest faith-based sort of writing conferences, and it gives you access to so many different kinds of writers, different kinds of editors, different kinds. Sorry about the siren in the background. I think those are good. It really sort of depends on what kind of writer you are. If you're more of a literary writer, Festival of Faith and Writing is great. There are other, if you're a fiction writer, there are different places. But I would say if you have any kind of literary sensibility at all, if you care about craft, Festival of Faith and Writing is a really great place to start. Again, Writing for Your Life. If you feel like some of the people that are presenting here and are presenting, if they represent houses you're really interested in, then attend the in-person conferences. Making those connections can really make a difference.
Yeah, so maybe I can talk a little bit about some of the specific things you've mentioned. So for those of you that are not aware, Festival of Faith and Writing is at Calvin College. It occurs every other year in the spring. So it occurred this last spring in April. So it won't be until April or spring of 2018, I think, until they have their next conference. It's a very large conference, generally of a couple thousand people in attendance. So it has, a large number of sessions and speakers. The Writing for Your Life conference that Lil mentioned is, our organization. We have two of them planned for 2017, two in-person conferences. The first one will be in May 2017 at Western Seminary and Hope College in Holland, Michigan. That's like May 16th and 17th, 2017. And then the second will be at Belmont University in Nashville in July 2017. And those dates have not been pinned down yet. But at both of those conferences, there are a couple of keynote speakers that you would recognize, plenty of breakout session speakers of either authors or people like Lil from the publishing industry. And then also there are two Frederick Buechner writers workshops coming up in 2017. And I'm also responsible for producing those. The first is at Princeton Theological Seminary in June 2017. And the second is at Fuller Seminary in September of 2017. So for what it's worth, those are all, I think, great opportunities for you to meet and interact with authors, with agents, with people from publishing houses. And, if you have any other questions about any of those, please write an email.
Yeah, if I can add one thing, Brian.
Absolutely.
Often you'll find I wouldn't want to call it a circuit, but often if there's a writer that you like following, I often like just sort of, doing my research online and seeing if they're speaking in any places that are conferences, what the publishers are, who the editors are, if there will be agents there. Sometimes you can kind of work sort of backwards to a conference that's really interesting, just by seeing where the people you really respect, where the publishing houses you really respect are being represented.
There was another one that I should have mentioned too, which I just attended in August, which is the American Christian Fiction Writers Conference. It's the first time I'd ever been to that event, and it was in Nashville. I believe that they hold it every year, and it's a pretty large event. So for people that wanting to make connections and going to start in the specific, Christian fiction arena, that would be a good opportunity, I think. So one question from Ruth is, how important is it to find a cultural fit with a publisher? For example, if you're from Kansas, would a big city publisher understand? Or if you're writing about, say, African American issues, where would you go?
Well, if you're writing about both at the same time, that would be really interesting. I mean, you have somebody like Kathleen Norris, right? Dakota. I mean, I'm sorry to use sort of like older examples, but they're easy, and I think they still represent a certain kind of sensibility. I think sensibility is key. I mean, if you
So let me ask a question. What do you mean by sensibility?
Well, I mean, I think when you're talking about like a publisher mission, I mean, you can look, if you just say to yourself, I'm not even going to look at the publisher's mission, I'm going to look at the books they've published in the last 2 years and look at their lists and look at their catalog online, it will tell you very quickly what they're looking at, what they're wanting to do, the kinds of voices they're representing, and the kind of range. And I don't think, I don't necessarily think like some of the, I guess I'm thinking about like Vanita Wright, who writes an incredible book on writing spirituality, books on spirituality and Christian faith. And I can't remember the title now, but it's Vanita Wright. But she has done a lot of writing from and about Kansas. I think it's the how. I think it's the literary craft. I don't necessarily, and I think it's also the subject matter. Is there what about like Dakota makes somebody in the city say, I'm so intrigued by this sense of place, no matter where I am, if I'm in Kansas, if I'm in the city, but there's something about place that this question is really compelling.
And from a publisher perspective, it kind of doesn't really matter, right? I mean, if it's a good book and it's a good topic and everything else is a fit, the kinds of things that you mentioned, they're going to like it regardless of where you're living or where you're coming from or what kind of culture you're speaking from, wouldn't it?
Well, I mean, I wouldn't just say because it's from Kansas, people will love it. I would say because it has appeal to the readership that a publisher has, that is why there would be that interest. So it's
yes, I totally, that's what I'm saying, basically.
Not, yes.
If you meet the things that you outlined,
right,
the criteria that you outlined,
sure.
It doesn't matter if you're from Kansas or not.
Right. Yes, thank you. I'm sorry, that was very wordy of me.
No. So let's see, maybe one more question.
Well, actually, one thing I would like to say, I mean, I think
sure,
if you are African American or you're writing about an African American experience, if you're, I mean, I think there are a lot of publishing houses. I mean, there's so many publishing houses looking for strong books by African American writers who have really strong craft, have really strong intention, and are speaking to some of the issues on race and reconciliation that are like very needed. So I wanted to address that. So
sure. So one more question. Are there any idea areas where you feel that you wish that there were more books in that area? I mean, you kind of just mentioned one, race and reconciliation.
Right. I mean, I think sort of big picture, and also I would say when I say this, it doesn't mean write to this. It's write to this if this is in your heart and in your like soul to do the kind of work. But I certainly think there's a lot of I've been very excited about books that are coming out on urban spirituality, because I think a lot of books on spirituality have been intentionally like go away and retreat, but the stuff that's happening in urban settings regarding spirituality and community is really exciting to me, and great to see on the landscape. I think there are things, sort of the big questions of ethics that are, when they're addressed at a sort of lay reader level, are really important. I mean, the way that people think and make judgments and act are I get excited about books on ethics that do not have ethics in the title. But I think they're really important, especially because the faith landscape has changed so much that the sort of ground for many writers and readers has shifted, and I think ethics speaks to some of that shift in a sort of dynamic and meaningful way. Race and reconciliation, social justice. I mean, I think there's so much that's really exciting happening in the church in the world that are, these small, beautiful movements. I mean, from, things like that are now, kind of, we've heard it before, but, people have sort of taken the idea of, slow food and what it looks like in community, what it looks like in reading, what it looks like in time, and those become really valuable for readers.
Good. Well, Lil, thank you so much for your presentation, for joining us, for sharing your insight and deep experience with everyone, and thank you all who have attended.
Thank you.